The Vampire King stood perfectly still as his personal attendant hissed a stream of ancient curses in a dialect that predated most modern languages, and all Willa Oakes could think as she knelt at his feet with her worn sewing kit was that the ivory silk of his formal coat probably cost more than her entire year's rent. She had been summoned from her cramped studio above the tailor shop at dawn, dragged through back corridors of a building she had never known existed beneath the financial district, and deposited in this vast chamber of black marble and silver, where preparations for some grand event churned around her like a whirlpool. No one had explained. No one had asked if she was willing. The pale-haired woman who had fetched her, with eyes like winter frost and skin the color of moonlight, had simply gripped her wrist hard enough to bruise and informed her that her hands were required, immediately, and that questions would be an inconvenience no one present had time to entertain. Now Willa threaded her needle with silk thread that matched the coat exactly, her fingers steady despite the cold sweat gathering at the base of her spine, and examined the tear that ran from the king's left cuff nearly to his elbow. The damage was clean, as though something sharp had sliced through the fabric in one precise motion, and beneath it she could see the pale flesh of his forearm, unmarked and perfect as carved alabaster. How long? The voice that spoke was not the attendant's. It came from above her, resonant and low, with an accent she could not place. The king himself addressing her directly. Willa did not look up. Every instinct she possessed, honed by 23 years of being poor and invisible in a city that devoured the weak, told her that meeting his gaze would be a mistake. 30 minutes, my lord. Perhaps 40, if the silk is delicate. You have 20. She did look up then, because the physics of sewing could not be negotiated even by someone who radiated the kind of absolute authority that pressed against her like a weight. His face was exactly what she had expected, and nothing like it at all. White hair fell past his shoulders, straight and fine as water, and his features were sharp enough to cut. High cheekbones, a blade of a nose, a mouth set in a line that suggested he had forgotten how to smile centuries ago. His eyes were the color of dark garnets, and they rested on her with an intensity that made her lungs forget their function. "The sleeve is fully detached," she said, and her voice came out calmer than she felt. "If you want it to hold through whatever you're doing today, I need 40 minutes. If you want it to look like it was never torn, I need an hour. If you want something that will fall apart the moment someone brushes against it, I can be done in 20. The attendant made a sound like a kettle boiling over. Willa kept her gaze level, waiting for whatever punishment was about to descend. She had no idea who this man was beyond the title that had been spat at her when she arrived, but she knew power when she saw it, and she knew that honesty was often the only currency she had to spend. Something flickered in those garnet eyes. Not anger, something else. Something that looked almost like surprise. 40 minutes, he said. Begin. Willa bent back to her work, sliding the coat carefully off his shoulders when he permitted it. Beneath, he wore a shirt of such fine white linen it was nearly transparent, and she tried very hard not to notice the way it draped over shoulders that were broader than his elegant frame had suggested. She spread the coat across her lap, assessed the damage more thoroughly, and began the delicate process of reattaching the sleeve with stitches so small they would be nearly invisible. Around her, the preparations continued. People swept in and out, all of them possessing that same unearthly pallor, that same predatory grace. She heard fragments of conversation in languages she did not recognize, instructions being given about flowers and music and the precise positioning of guests according to some hierarchy she could not fathom. No one looked at her. She was a tool, a pair of hands as invisible as the needle she wielded, but the king remained. He had dismissed his attendant with a flick of his fingers, and now he stood 3 feet away, watching her work with an attention that made every stitch feel like a test she had not studied for. "You are afraid," he observed after 15 minutes had passed in silence. Willa's needle never faltered. "Yes, my lord. Yet your hands are steady." "Fear doesn't pay my rent, my lord. Good work does." Another silence, this one longer. She was halfway through reattaching the sleeve, the stitches flowing in the rhythm she had learned from her grandmother, the only family she had ever known. The silk whispered under her fingers, and she let herself fall into the meditation of the work, the only place she ever felt truly competent. "What is your name?" She hesitated, then decided that lying would be more dangerous than the truth. "Willa Oakes." "You were not on the list of tailors my household employs." "I'm not a tailor. I work for Martin's shop on 7th Street. I do alterations and repairs. One of your people came to the shop this morning looking for someone who could do invisible mending on silk." She tied off a stitch, began another. "Martin sent me. He said he couldn't afford to offend whoever was asking." Wise of him. The words were neutral, but they confirmed what she had already suspected. These people, whatever they were, held enough power that a skilled tailor would send his least experienced worker into an unknown situation rather than risk saying no. It should have made her more afraid. Instead, it just made her tired. This was how the world worked when you were poor. You were always the one standing closest to the edge, always the most expendable piece on the board. Why do you live above the shop if you are not an apprentice? The question was curious, almost gentle, so at odds with the iron in his voice when he had spoken before, that it startled her into looking up again. "Martin lets me rent the empty studio. It's cheap and it's close to the work." She met his eyes, then looked away quickly, unsettled by what she saw there. Interest. Actual, focused interest, as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "I'm saving money for my own shop someday. It's easier if I don't spend it all on housing." "Your own shop." He repeated the words as though tasting them. "You wish to be independent." "I wish to be safe," Willa corrected quietly. "Independence is just the fastest route there." The sleeve was nearly complete now. Her fingers moved with the sureness of long practice, pulling each stitch tight enough to hold, but loose enough that the fabric would not pucker. 3/4 done. The silk was holding beautifully, and when she finished, the repair would be almost undetectable unless someone knew exactly where to look. "You do not ask why the coat was damaged." "It's not my business, my lord." Most people are curious. Most people aren't kneeling on a marble floor in a room full of strangers who could probably kill them without breaking a sweat. She tied off another stitch. "I've found that curiosity is expensive. You are perceptive. I'm poor. It teaches you to pay attention." She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and considering. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken, and for a moment the noise of preparation around them faded into something distant and unimportant. There was only the slide of thread through silk, the barely audible sound of her own breathing, and the presence of the man standing over her like a marble statue come to life. "The wedding," he said slowly, as though the words were being dragged from some deep place, "is a political arrangement. The bride is the daughter of the High Lord of the Eastern Courts. The union is meant to bind our territories and end a conflict that has lasted 300 years. Willa's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. A wedding. She was sewing a sleeve for a wedding coat. His wedding coat. "I see," she managed. "Then you'll definitely want this done properly. Can't have the groom looking shabby." "I am Xavion Constantine." He said it as though the name should mean something, as though it should make her drop the needle and prostrate herself. When she simply nodded and returned to her work, he continued, "I am the vampire king of the Western realm. I have held this throne for 800 years. I have fought wars that reshaped continents. I have negotiated treaties that ended genocides. And in 40 minutes, I am supposed to walk into that hall and bind myself for eternity to a woman I have met exactly 4 times in order to prevent a war that would kill thousands." The weight of that confession settled over Willa like a shroud. She did not know what to do with it, why he was telling her, what response he possibly expected. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She kept sewing. "The tear," she said quietly, finishing the final stitches and knotting the thread with practiced efficiency. "How did it happen?" "I tore it myself." His voice was flat. "An hour ago. I did not intend to. I was standing in my chambers, and my attendant was explaining the final details of the ceremony, and I looked at this coat and I could not breathe. I am a vampire king. I do not need to breathe. Yet I could not." Willa bit off the thread, examined her work with a critical eye, and carefully helped him back into the coat. She smoothed the sleeve down his arm, her fingers brushing against the cool skin of his wrist for just a moment, checking the drape and the way the fabric moved. Perfect. No one would ever know it had been damaged. "It's done, my lord," she said, and started to gather her supplies. His hand caught her wrist, gentle but immovable. She froze. "Look at me." She did not want to. Every instinct screamed that looking would change something, that meeting his eyes would pull her into currents she could not navigate. But his fingers were cool against her skin, and his voice held a note that was not quite command, not quite plea, and she found herself raising her gaze to his. The world tilted. His eyes were not just garnet. They were fire and darkness and centuries of memory, and they looked at her as though she were the only real thing in the room, as though everyone else was a painting on a wall and she alone was solid, warm, true. "You have given me 40 minutes of honesty," he said softly. "You did not flatter. You did not grovel. You did not pretend to be anything other than what you are. You knelt on cold marble and sewed my sleeve and told me that fear does not pay rent." His thumb traced across her pulse point, and she wondered if he could feel the way her heart was trying to break through her ribs. "In 800 years, do you know how rare that is?" "My lord," Willa whispered, because she did not know what else to say, because the air felt too thin and her thoughts were scattering like birds. "I do not love the woman I am meant to marry. I will never love her. She is brilliant and cruel and perfectly suited to rule, and we will make each other miserable for eternity." He released her wrist, stepped back, and something in his perfect posture shifted. Not a slump, nothing so human as that, but a settling, as though he had made a decision that both terrified and relieved him. "I'm going to call off the wedding." The words hit her like cold water. "What?" "The treaty can be renegotiated. The war can be prevented by other means. But I will not chain myself to someone I can barely tolerate because it is convenient." His gaze never left hers. "You have reminded me that there are people in this world who value honesty over expedience, who do good work simply because poor work offends them, who are afraid and do the task anyway, because that is what survival requires." He lifted one hand, and for a moment she thought he might touch her face, but he let it fall back to his side. "I had forgotten. You have reminded me, and I find that I cannot walk into that hall and make vows of eternity while remembering the way you looked at my coat and told me the truth about how long it would take." "You can't," Willa breathed. "I mean, my lord, you can't just call off a wedding because a seamstress was honest with you for 40 minutes. That's insane. I am the Vampire King. I can do as I wish. You said this wedding was supposed to prevent a war. Then I will prevent the war another way." "My lord, Xavion," he interrupted, "if we are to cause a scandal together, you should at least use my name." "We are not causing anything together," Willa said desperately, shoving her needle and thread back into her kit with shaking hands. "I sewed your sleeve. That's all. I'm going to leave now, and you're going to walk into that wedding, and in a year, you won't even remember my name." She stood, clutching her kit to her chest like a shield, and turned toward the door. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. "I will remember your name when empires have crumbled to dust, Willa Oakes." Each word was a promise and a threat. "I will remember the way your hands moved while you worked. I will remember that you told me fear does not pay rent, and that you looked at me without awe or terror, only exhaustion and honesty. I will remember, and I will not walk into that hall." Willa did not turn around. "Then you're a fool, my lord." She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her sternum. And by the time she reached the surface streets, the sun was fully risen, and the morning crowds were thick around her. No one followed. No one stopped her. She was, once again, invisible and anonymous, just another tired worker in a city that ground people to dust and never noticed their passing. She told herself that he would come to his senses, that by evening the wedding would have proceeded, and whatever strange moment had passed between them would be nothing more than a story she would never tell anyone because no one would believe it. She told herself that, and she almost managed to believe it until Martin met her at the door of the shop with a face like curdled milk. "What did you do?" he hissed, dragging her inside. "What in God's name did you do?" "I sewed a sleeve," Willa said numbly. "That's all. I swear, Martin, that's all I did." "Then why?" Martin said, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "Did I just receive a message from the Constantine household saying that the wedding has been called off and that you are to remain available for further consultation?" The needle kit slipped from Willa's fingers and hit the floor with a clatter that sounded, in that moment, like the end of the world. The rumors began before sunset. Willa heard them in fragments over the next 3 days, each one worse than the last. The Vampire King had called off his wedding. No explanation given. The bride had returned to the eastern courts in a rage that was said to have shattered windows in her father's palace. The political situation was a disaster. War was brewing, and at the center of it all, whispered in tones of scandal and disbelief, was a human woman, a seamstress. A nobody who had somehow bewitched the king with magic or seduction, or some combination of the two. She did not leave her studio. Martin had made it clear that she was no longer welcome in the shop. He could not risk being associated with whatever catastrophe she had unleashed. She had enough savings for a month, maybe 2 if she was careful. After that, she would have to find new work, and she had no illusions about how easy that would be now that her name was circulating through the city like a curse. On the 4th day, someone knocked on her door. Willa ignored it. She ignored the 2nd knock as well, and the 3rd. But the knocking continued, steady and patient, and finally she dragged herself out of bed and opened the door a crack, ready to tell whoever it was to leave her alone. A woman stood in the hallway. Not the pale-haired vampire who had dragged Willa to the king's chamber, but someone new. She had the same white skin and white hair, the same ageless beauty, but her eyes were softer, gray as winter clouds. She wore modern clothes, jeans and a sweater, and she held a folded piece of paper in one hand. "Willa Oakes," her voice was courteous, almost warm. "Go away. I have a message from Xavier Constantine. I don't want it. Nevertheless, I am instructed to deliver it. May I come in?" "No." The woman sighed, then held out the paper. "He thought you might say that. He asked me to tell you that he is not sorry, that he has made his choice, and that you are not required to do anything except continue existing. He also wanted you to know that your name has been kept out of the official reports, that anyone who speaks of you in connection with the cancelled wedding will be dealt with, and that you need not fear for your safety or your employment." She paused. "And that he would very much like to see you again, but only if you wish it." Willa stared at the paper as though it were a snake. "I don't wish it." "Then I will convey that message. However, you should know that the vampire court is in chaos, and the woman who is meant to marry him is not the forgiving type. Serafina Dracoff is her name, and she believes you are the reason her wedding was destroyed." The gray-eyed vampire's expression grew grim. "Xavier has forbidden anyone from approaching you, but he cannot watch you every moment. If you have any sense, you will accept his protection." "I don't need protection. I haven't done anything wrong." "You existed in his presence at a vulnerable moment, and you were yourself. In the world of vampire politics, that is more than enough." The woman set the paper on the floor at Willa's feet. "Read the letter. Think about it. If you change your mind, place a candle in your window at night. Someone will see it." She left before Willa could respond, her footsteps silent on the stairs. Willa stared at the folded paper for a long time. Then she picked it up, went back inside, and sat down at her rickety table in the thin afternoon light. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, each letter formed with the precision of someone who had learned to write centuries before typewriters existed. "Willa Oakes, I am told that I owe you an apology. I do not agree. I owe you nothing but honesty, and that I will give freely. I have lived 800 years. In that time, I have known war and peace, love and hatred, triumph and despair. I have forgotten what it feels like to be surprised. I had accepted that all things, given enough time, become predictable. You knelt on marble and sewed my sleeve and spoke to me as though I were merely a man who needed his coat repaired. You did not see a king. You saw someone who was about to do something he did not wish to do, and you did not offer empty comfort or false encouragement. You simply did your work and you told me the truth. I do not know if what I feel is love. I am not certain I remember what love feels like. But I know that I have not stopped thinking about you since you walked out of my chamber. I know that the idea of binding myself to Serafina Dracoff has become unthinkable now that I have remembered what it feels like to speak with someone who does not want anything from me except payment for a job well done. I do not ask you to love me. I do not ask you to come to me. I ask only that you allow me to ensure your safety while the courts settle into this new reality. There are those who will blame you for the canceled wedding, and I will not allow you to suffer for my decision. If you wish to see me again, place a candle in your window at night. If you do not, I will respect that choice, but my protection remains regardless. Yours, Xavian Constantine Willa, read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it, put it in a drawer, and tried to pretend that her hands were not shaking. She did not put a candle in the window that night, or the next. She told herself she was being sensible. The Vampire King would move on, the scandal would fade, and she would rebuild her life somewhere else, in another city where no one knew her name. It was the smart thing to do. The only thing to do. But on the 7th night after the canceled wedding, someone tried to break into her studio. Willa woke to the sound of splintering wood. She bolted upright in bed, her heart in her throat, and grabbed the scissors she kept on her nightstand. The door shook in its frame, and she heard voices outside, low and angry. The king's whore is in there. Serafina wants her brought to the eastern courts. Are you insane? If Constantine finds out, he won't find out if we're quick. She's just a human. It's not like she can fight back. Willa's mind went blank with terror. She looked at the window, but she was 3 floors up and there was no fire escape. She looked at the door and saw it beginning to buckle. She was trapped. The door burst open. 3 vampires poured into the room, all of them male, all of them wearing the kind of expensive clothes that marked them as nobility. The first one smiled when he saw her, and his fangs gleamed white in the moonlight. There you are, little seamstress. Serafina wants to have a conversation with you. You should feel honored. It's not often she takes an interest in vermin. Willa raised her scissors, her hand shaking so hard she could barely hold them. Get out. They laughed. The first vampire took a step toward her. Then he stopped, his smile faltering. He tilted his head, as though listening to something Willa could not hear, and the color drained from his already pale face. No, he whispered. No, we were told he was at the Western Hall. We checked. The window shattered inward. Xavian Constantine came through it like a winter storm, glass and moonlight swirling around him, and the temperature in the room dropped so fast that Willa's breath misted in the air. He landed between her and the 3 vampires, and the force of his presence was enough to drive them back against the wall. You broke into her home, he said softly. Each word was wrapped in ice. You threatened her. You invoked the name of Serafina Dracoff as though that would protect you. He took a step forward, and the vampires cringed. It will not. My lord, one of them stammered. We were only... Xavian moved. Willa did not see how. One moment he was standing in the center of the room, and the next the first vampire was on his knees, Xavian's hand around his throat. The vampire made a choked sound, his eyes rolling with terror. You will return to the eastern courts, Xavian said, his voice still terribly soft. And you will tell Serafina Dracoff that if she sends anyone else to harm this woman, I will consider it an act of war. Not a political war, a personal one. Do you understand? The vampire nodded frantically. Xavian released him, and all 3 of them scrambled for the door, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. Their footsteps thundered down the stairs, and then there was silence. Willa stood frozen, scissors still clutched in her hand, her entire body shaking. Xavian turned to face her, and the inhuman coldness drained from his expression, replaced by something that looked almost like anguish. I am sorry, he said quietly. I should have anticipated this. I should have stationed guards. I should have... How did you know? Willa interrupted. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and thin. You weren't here. That vampire said you were at the Western Hall. I was, but I have had someone watching your building since the day you refused my letter. When your window shattered, they sent word immediately. He glanced at the broken glass scattered across her floor, the splintered door. I should have been faster. Willa looked at the scissors in her hand, at the door hanging crookedly on its hinges, at the Vampire King standing in her shabby studio in his perfect coat, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, and something inside her, something that had been holding together through sheer will, finally snapped. I sewed your sleeve, she whispered. That's all I did. I sewed your sleeve, and now people want to hurt me, and I can't go back to work, and I'm going to run out of money, and none of this is my fault. Her voice cracked. None of this is my fault. No, Xavion said, and his voice was gentle in a way she would not have thought possible. It is mine. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and very carefully took the scissors from her shaking hand. Then he did something that shocked her more than anything else that had happened that night. He knelt, just as she had knelt when she sewed his sleeve, and looked up at her with those garnet eyes. I have destroyed your life, he said simply. I knew the risks when I called off the wedding, and I accepted them for myself. But I did not think through what those risks would mean for you. I was selfish. I was 800 years old and so tired of going through the motions that when I met someone real, I grabbed hold without considering the consequences. He bowed his head. I am sorry, Willa Oakes. You deserved better. Willa stared down at him, at the Vampire King kneeling on her floor amid broken glass, and felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. He was not lying. He was not performing. He was simply, terribly honest, the same way she had been when she told him 40 minutes for the sleeve. Get up, she said quietly. Please, I can't think when you're kneeling. He rose in one fluid motion and she took a shaky breath, trying to organize the chaos of her thoughts into something coherent. I need to know what's happening, she finally said. All of it. The truth, not the version you think I can handle. If I'm in danger, if there's going to be a war, if I'm at the center of some nightmare I don't understand, I need to know. Xavion studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You do, and you will, but not here. This building is compromised, and I will not risk your safety by lingering. He held out one hand. Will you come with me? I give you my word that no harm will come to you, and that you may leave whenever you wish. Willa looked at his outstretched hand, at the ruined door, at the studio that had been her refuge and was now just another place she was not safe. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, cool and steady, and then the world lurched sideways in a way that made her stomach flip. When it settled again, she was standing in a room that looked like it belonged in a castle, all dark wood and stone walls and furniture that was probably older than her great-great-grandparents. A fire burned in a massive hearth, and the floor was covered in thick carpets that muffled sound. Where are we? She managed, clutching his hand because letting go felt like falling. My private chambers in the Western Hall. He released her carefully, as though she were something fragile. The most secure location in my territory. No one will disturb us here. Willa sank down onto the nearest chair before her legs could give out. You can teleport. After a fashion. It is not true teleportation, merely moving faster than the human eye can perceive, but the effect is similar. He moved to a cabinet, poured something into a glass, and brought it to her. Drink. It will help with the shock. She took the glass with numb fingers and sipped. Whatever it was burned going down, but warmth spread through her chest, and the shaking in her hands eased slightly. Xavion settled into the chair across from her, his posture as perfect as always, and waited. Tell me, Willa said. Everything. So he did. He told her about the war that had been brewing between the Western and Eastern vampire courts for 3 centuries, a conflict rooted in territory and resources and old grudges that had festered into hatred. He told her about Serafina Dracoff, daughter of the Eastern High Lord, a vampire of incredible power and ambition who had agreed to the marriage only because it would give her access to the Western throne. He told her about the treaty that had been painstakingly negotiated over decades, every clause a battle, every compromise a potential breaking point. And he told her that by calling off the wedding, he had essentially torn that treaty to pieces. "The Eastern courts believe they have been insulted," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "Serafina is demanding reparations. Her father is threatening war. My own council is in chaos, half of them insisting I reinstate the wedding, the other half scrambling to find an alternative that will prevent bloodshed." He paused. "And in the middle of it all, there is a rumor that I called off the wedding because I met a human woman who bewitched me. Serafina has seized on that rumor. It gives her an enemy to focus on, someone to blame other than herself." "So she wants me dead," Willa said flatly. "She wants you humiliated, broken, brought before her so she can demonstrate to everyone that you are nothing special, that I made a mistake, that the wedding should be reinstated." His voice went cold. "I will not allow that to happen. Even if it means war? Even then." Willa set down the glass and rubbed her face with both hands. Her mind was spinning, trying to process information that felt like it belonged in a nightmare. "This is insane. You don't even know me. We talked for 40 minutes. You can't start a war over 40 minutes. It is not about 40 minutes. Xavier leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Willa, I have spent centuries surrounded by people who lie as easily as they breathe, who scheme and manipulate and present whatever face they think will gain them advantage. I am so accustomed to it that I had forgotten there was any other way to exist." His voice dropped. "And then you knelt on marble and told me that fear does not pay rent, and you looked at my coat with the focus of someone who takes pride in their work, and I realized I was about to bind myself to a woman who would never look at me the way you looked at that sleeve." "That's not love," Willa whispered. "That's just loneliness." "Perhaps, but it is my loneliness, and I am the king. I will not be forced into a marriage that will make me miserable simply because it is politically convenient." He sat back, and something in his expression gentled. "I do not expect you to love me. I do not expect anything from you. But I will not allow Serafina to punish you for my decision. You will have my protection. And if that protection requires war, then there will be war." Willa wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being ridiculous, that she was not worth the lives that would be lost. But she looked at his face, at the absolute certainty there, and knew that nothing she said would change his mind. "What do I do?" she asked instead, her voice small. "I can't go home. I can't work. I can't just hide in your chambers forever." "No, you cannot," Xavier agreed. "But there are options. My council meets tomorrow evening. They will discuss potential solutions to the crisis. You could attend that meeting." "Why would I do that?" "Because the rumors say you are a schemer who manipulated me. If you attend, they will see the truth, that you are a seamstress who was caught in a political maelstrom through no fault of her own." He tilted his head. "And because you are clever, Willa Oakes, you see things clearly. You might offer a perspective that my council, entrenched as they are in centuries of vampire politics, cannot. I don't know anything about politics. Then you will ask questions. Sometimes that is more valuable than answers." Willa laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You really are insane. I prefer determined." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Will you attend?" She should say no, should demand that he take her back to her studio, broken door and all, and leave her alone. Should run as far and as fast as her legs could carry her. Instead, she heard herself say, "If I attend, and if I somehow help, will you make sure I can go back to my life? Not in that studio, obviously, but somewhere safe, where I can work and save money and not be hunted by vengeful vampire nobles?" "You have my word. And if war happens anyway, you won't blame me for it?" "The war, if it comes, will be because I refuse to be a pawn in a political game. That is no one's responsibility but mine." Willa looked at him for a long moment, This strange, intense creature who had upended her life and seemed determined to protect her even as he destroyed everything around them. Then she nodded. "All right, I'll go to your council meeting, but I'm going to need something to wear. All my clothes are back in that studio, and somehow I don't think a mended shirt and patched jeans are going to make the right impression." The smile that crossed Xavier's face was small but genuine, and it transformed him from something cold and marble perfect into something almost human. "I believe that can be arranged," he said. The council chamber was even more intimidating than Willa had imagined. It was vast, with a ceiling that soared into darkness and walls lined with tapestries that depicted battles and coronations from centuries past. A long table of black wood dominated the center, and around it sat 12 vampires, all of them radiating power and age and barely contained hostility. Willa stood just behind Xavier's chair, wearing a dress that someone had provided for her, simple but elegant, deep blue fabric that fit perfectly and made her feel only slightly less like an imposter. Every eye in the room was on her, and none of those gazes were friendly. "This is an outrage," one of the vampires said, his voice sharp. He was older than the others, his white hair braided intricately, his face all hard angles. "You bring a human to a council meeting? During a crisis?" "Willa Oakes is the reason for the crisis, according to Serafina Dreykov," Xavier said calmly. It seemed prudent to allow her to speak for herself. "She is vermin," another council member spat, a woman with cold eyes. "She has no place here." Willa flinched, but Xavier's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "If you insult her again, Ilara, you will be removed from this council permanently. She is under my protection, and I will not tolerate disrespect." Silence fell, tense and brittle. The woman named Ilara bared her fangs but said nothing. The vampire who had spoken first, the one with the braided hair, sighed heavily. "My lord, we must discuss the situation with the Eastern courts. Serafina's father has sent word that he considers the broken engagement an act of war. He is demanding either the reinstatement of the marriage or substantial territorial concessions. If we refuse both, we will have war within the month." "Then we find a third option," Xavier said. "There is no third option." Ilara leaned forward. "You have insulted the Eastern High Lord and humiliated his daughter. The only way to repair this is to marry Serafina as planned and hope that she is willing to overlook your momentary lapse in judgment." "I did not lapse in judgment. I made a choice. A foolish choice, driven by a human's trickery." "Enough." Xavier's voice was not loud, but it silenced the room instantly. "Willa Oakes used no trickery. She sewed a sleeve. That is all. The rest is my doing, and mine alone." "Then undo it," the braided-haired vampire said quietly. "My lord, I have served you for 400 years. I respect you. But this is not the time for pride. War will cost us thousands of lives, and for what? Because you do not wish to marry Serafina Dreykov?" Xavier was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Aldrich, if I told you that I could not marry Serafina and remain myself, would you believe me?" The vampire named Aldrich stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I am tired." Xavier's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I have ruled for 800 years. I have made war and peace, and I have done what was necessary for my people, always. But I am so very tired, and the thought of spending eternity with a woman who looks at me as though I am a tool to be used makes me want to walk into the sun." The council went utterly still. Willa's breath caught. He had not said those words to her, but she heard the truth in them, the bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of power could erase. "You cannot mean that," Ilara whispered. "I do." Xavier met her gaze steadily. "And if the price of maintaining myself is war, then there will be war. But I will not chain myself to Serafina Dreykov." Aldrich rubbed his face with both hands, looking suddenly ancient despite his unlined features. "Then we must find another way to satisfy the Eastern courts, some concession that Serafina will accept in place of the marriage." He glanced at Willa, his expression calculating. "If the rumor is that the king was bewitched by this woman, perhaps we can use that. We could claim she holds some power over him, that the broken engagement was not his choice." "No." Xavier's voice was flat. "I will not allow Willa to be painted as a villain in order to salvage political expediency." "Then what do you suggest?" Ilara demanded. We cannot go to war, and we cannot repair the insult. We are trapped, my lord, and it is your fault. Willa had been silent through the entire exchange, listening and trying to understand the currents of power and history that swirled through the room. But now, hearing the desperation in Ilara's voice, the weariness in Aldrich's, she found herself speaking before she could think better of it. What does Serafina actually want? Every head turned toward her. Xavian looked surprised. Aldrich looked curious. Ilara looked furious. Excuse me, Ilara said icily. Willa swallowed hard but pushed forward. Everyone keeps talking about the insult and the broken engagement and the war. But what does Serafina herself actually want? Not her father, not the Eastern courts. Her. She wants to rule the Western realm, Aldrich said slowly. She agreed to the marriage because it would make her queen. So she wants power, Willa said. Not Xavian specifically. Power. Obviously. Why does that matter? Because if she wants power, maybe there's a way to give her power without the marriage. Willa looked at Xavian, then at the council. I don't know how vampire politics work, but in the human world, alliances aren't just about marriages. They're about trade, about shared resources, about mutual benefit. Is there something the Western realm has that the Eastern courts want? Something that Serafina could take credit for obtaining, so she looks powerful instead of humiliated? The council was silent. Aldrich frowned, his expression thoughtful. Ilara looked skeptical, but no longer openly hostile. The silver mines, one of the other council members said suddenly, a younger-looking vampire with sharp features. The Eastern courts have been trying to gain access to our silver mines for a century. Silver is rare in their territory, and they need it for trade with the human world. We cannot simply give them the mines, Ilara protested. They are too valuable. Not give, Willa said quickly. Trade or lease. Give Serafina some kind of agreement where she negotiates access to the mines for the Eastern courts, something that makes her look brilliant and powerful. Let her save face by turning the broken engagement into a trade victory. Aldrich sat back in his chair, his eyes distant. It could work. If we framed it correctly, if we made it seem as though Serafina's refusal to marry the king after his lapse in judgment was the catalyst for a more equitable alliance, she could come out of this looking strong rather than rejected. She would have to agree to it, another council member pointed out. And she is deeply humiliated. She may refuse out of spite. Then we make the offer so generous that refusing it would make her look foolish, Xavian said. His voice was calm, but there was a new energy in it, a spark of something that might have been hope. We offer a long-term lease on the silver mines, favorable trade terms, and a public apology for the broken engagement that frames her as the one who chose to pursue a better path for her people. She will never believe you are sorry, Ilara said. I am not sorry. But I can apologize for the method, for not discussing my doubts before the wedding day, for putting her in a position of public humiliation. That much is true. Xavian glanced at Willa, and the look in his eyes was warm. And if Willa Oakes, the woman at the center of the scandal, is seen standing beside me during the negotiations, advocating for this new alliance, it will be clear that she is not a schemer, but someone who wants peace as much as anyone. Willa's stomach dropped. Wait, what? You would be part of the negotiation team, Xavian explained. A symbol that the broken engagement was not about choosing you over Serafina, but about refusing to enter into a marriage that was wrong for both parties. Your presence would humanize the situation, literally. It would be harder for Serafina to paint you as a villain if you are actively working to give her something better than a loveless marriage. I can't negotiate with vampire nobility, Willa protested. I don't know how. You just proposed the framework for an alliance in 5 minutes, Aldrich said, and there was respect in his voice now. I think you know more than you believe, Miss Oakes. The council debated for another hour, refining the proposal, discussing how to present it to the Eastern courts in a way that would appeal to Serafina's pride and her ambition. Willa listened more than she spoke, but every so often someone would ask her opinion, and she would offer it as honestly as she could. By the time the meeting ended, there was a plan, fragile and imperfect, but real. As the council members filed out, Aldrich paused beside Xavion. "You have chosen an interesting human, my lord." "I have," Xavion agreed. "Let us hope she is enough to prevent a war." When they were alone, Willa turned to Xavion and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You did not have to speak," he said quietly. "The council was prepared to dismiss you." "I know, but you looked like you were about to start a war out of stubbornness, and I couldn't just stand there and let that happen." She hesitated. "Do you really think this will work?" "I think it has a better chance than anything else we have discussed." He crossed to her, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand again, but he simply stood close, his presence steady and calm. "You are remarkable, Willa Oakes." "I'm really not. I'm just a seamstress who asked a question." "You are a seamstress who sees clearly. That is rarer than you know." His voice dropped. "And you are someone I am beginning to believe I cannot imagine existing without." Willa's heart stuttered. "Xavion." "I know. It is too soon. We have known each other only days. But I am 800 years old, and I have learned to recognize what matters when I find it." He stepped back, giving her space. "You do not have to feel the same. I ask only that you allow me the honor of your company while we navigate this crisis. After that, if you wish to return to your life, I will ensure you have everything you need." Willa wanted to say something cutting, something that would establish distance and sanity. But when she looked at him, at the vulnerability beneath the regal mask, she found she could not. "Let's survive the negotiation first," she said instead. "Then we can talk about what comes after." The corner of his mouth lifted. "As you wish." The negotiations took place in a neutral location, a grand estate on the border between the western and eastern territories that had once belonged to a vampire noble who had managed to stay friendly with both courts. The building was all old-world elegance, marble and gold and soaring windows that let in the moonlight. Willa stood beside Xavion in a receiving hall, wearing another borrowed dress, this one a deep green that someone had assured her was diplomatically neutral. Her hands were shaking, and she clasped them together to hide it. "Breathe," Xavion murmured. "You have already done the hard part. Now you simply need to be present." "What if she hates me on sight?" "She will. But that is not your concern. Your concern is to remain calm and courteous, no matter what she says." Before Willa could respond, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. A group of vampires entered, all of them dressed in the elaborate finery of the Eastern courts, and at their center walked Serafina Dracoff. She was breathtaking, taller than Willa, with white hair that cascaded down her back in intricate braids woven through with gold thread, and eyes the color of ice. Her gown was crimson, cut to emphasize every elegant line of her body, and she moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you were the most dangerous person in any room. Her gaze swept over Xavion with cold disdain, then landed on Willa. For a moment, something hot and vicious flickered in those ice-pale eyes. "So, this is the human," Serafina said, her voice rich and mocking. "How disappointing. I expected someone more impressive, given that she managed to bewitch a king." "Miss Oakes did not bewitch anyone," Xavion said evenly. "She is here as part of the negotiation team, representing the Western Realm's commitment to finding a peaceful solution." "How noble." Serafina glided closer, and Willa had to fight the urge to step back. The vampire woman studied her like a scientist examining an insect. "Tell me, little seamstress, what could you possibly offer in a negotiation between courts? Can you even read a treaty?" "I can read," Willa said, keeping her voice steady with an effort. "And I can listen. Sometimes that's more useful than talking." Serafina's eyes narrowed. "You have courage, I'll grant you that. Or perhaps you're simply too ignorant to understand the danger you're in." "That's enough," Xavion said, and there was steel in his voice. "Serafina, we are here to discuss an alliance, not to trade insults. Shall we proceed?" The negotiations were brutal. Serafina was brilliant and ruthless, picking apart every clause of the proposed treaty, demanding more favorable terms, pushing for concessions that would have crippled the Western realm's economy. Xavion held his ground with the patience of someone who had negotiated treaties for centuries, but even Willa could see the toll it was taking. She sat at the table, silent for most of it, watching the back and forth and trying to understand the currents beneath the words. Aldrich and the other Western Council members argued points of trade law and territorial rights. The Eastern delegation countered with historical grievances and economic projections. And through it all, Serafina's gaze kept drifting to Willa, cold and assessing. It was on the third day of negotiations, when tempers were fraying and progress had stalled, that Serafina finally addressed Willa directly. "You have been very quiet, Miss Oakes," she said, her tone deceptively pleasant. "Do you have nothing to contribute? Or are you merely decorative?" Willa met her gaze and saw the trap. Serafina wanted her to either stay silent and prove she was useless, or speak and say something foolish that could be used against her. "I've been listening," Willa said carefully, "and I've noticed that both sides keep talking about what happened in the past. Grievances from a century ago, insults from 50 years back, but no one's talking about the future." "The past informs the future," one of the Eastern delegates said dismissively. "Does it? Or does focusing on the past just keep both sides stuck in the same patterns?" Willa looked around the table at the vampires who had lived for centuries and had probably been having versions of this same argument for longer than she had been alive. "You're all immortal. You have time to hold grudges forever. But does that actually get you anywhere? Or does it just mean you spend eternity fighting the same fights?" Silence fell. Serafina leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "What are you suggesting, Miss Oakes?" Aldrich asked. "I'm suggesting that maybe the treaty shouldn't just be about fixing what went wrong in the past. Maybe it should be about building something new. The silver mines are valuable, but they're just one resource. What if the alliance included joint projects, shared infrastructure, combined trade routes with the human world, collaborative research into things that benefit both realms?" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "In the human world, the strongest alliances aren't the ones where both sides are trying to get the better deal. They're the ones where both sides benefit so much from working together that breaking the alliance would hurt them both. Maybe that's what this treaty needs to be." The Eastern delegates exchanged glances. Serafina's expression remained cold, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been interest. "A joint venture," one of the Eastern nobles said slowly. "Combining the Western realm's silver with the Eastern court's trade networks, it would be unprecedented. It would also require a level of trust that does not currently exist," Serafina pointed out. But her voice lacked its earlier venom. She was thinking. Xavion leaned forward slightly. "Trust can be built, if both sides are willing. And a joint venture of the scope Miss Oakes is suggesting would give both realms a vested interest in each other's success. It would be harder to justify war when war would destroy something we built together. It would also give me more to bring back to my father than a simple trade agreement," Serafina said, and now there was calculation in her voice. "A new model for vampire alliances, one that could be replicated with other courts. It would be a legacy." "Your legacy," Aldrich said, catching on. "You could frame this entire negotiation as your innovation, your vision for the future of vampire politics." Serafina was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she looked at Willa, and the hostility in her eyes had been replaced by something closer to grudging respect. "You are clever, little seamstress, and you are right that I was focused on the insult rather than the opportunity." She turned to Xavion. "I will agree to this new framework, but I have conditions. The joint venture must be substantial enough to justify my broken engagement. I will not be seen as accepting scraps." "Name your terms," Xavion said. The negotiation shifted after that. It was still difficult, still full of arguments and compromise, but there was a new energy to it, a sense that they were building something rather than just dividing spoils. Willa contributed where she could, mostly by asking questions that forced both sides to clarify their positions. And slowly, painstakingly, a treaty began to take shape. On the final day, as the last clauses were being drafted and the scribes were preparing the formal documents, Serafina approached Willa in one of the estate's side chambers. "I owe you honesty," Serafina said without preamble. "I wanted to destroy you. When Xavion called off the wedding, I was humiliated, and I wanted someone to pay for that humiliation. You were convenient." "I noticed," Willa said dryly. "But you are not what I expected. You are not a schemer or a manipulator. You are simply someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and who chose to try to fix the disaster rather than flee from it." Serafina's expression was unreadable. "I do not like you. I do not think I ever will. But I respect you. That is rare." "I don't like you either," Willa admitted. "But I respect what you've done here. You could have let your pride destroy this negotiation. Instead, you saw the opportunity and took it. That takes strength." "It does." Serafina tilted her head. "Do you love him, Xavion?" The question caught Willa off guard. She opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Did she love him? She barely knew him. But she knew the way he had knelt on her floor and apologized. She knew the way he had protected her without asking for anything in return. She knew the way he looked at her, as though she were the only real thing in a world of shadows. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe. It's too soon to tell." "Then let me offer you advice, human to human, even though I am not human, and you are nothing like me." Serafina's voice dropped. "Xavion Constantine is a good king. He is fair and strong, and he cares about his people. But he is also 800 years old, and he is lonely in ways you cannot imagine. If you choose to be with him, you will be choosing a life that is not easy. You will be an outsider in a world that does not want you. You will age while he stays forever young. And when you die, he will mourn you for centuries." She paused. "Be sure it is worth it before you commit. And if I walk away, then he will let you go, because he is honorable. But it will break something in him that I do not think will heal." Serafina turned to leave, then glanced back. "Choose wisely, Miss Oakes, for both your sakes." The treaty was signed in a grand ceremony that Willa watched from the sidelines, feeling small and out of place among the vampire nobles who had gathered to witness history. Xavion and Serafina stood together at the center of the hall, their signatures flowing across the parchment in elaborate script, and when it was done, the applause was thunderous. Serafina left immediately after, her retinue sweeping out with all the drama of a theater production. The Western delegation lingered, celebrating the successful negotiation, but Xavion slipped away from the crowd and found Willa standing on a balcony that overlooked the estate's gardens. "You are avoiding the celebration," he observed, joining her at the railing. "I don't belong there. This is your victory, not mine." "It is our victory. You made this possible, Willa." She shook her head. "I asked a few questions. You're the one who actually negotiated. And I would have failed without you." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "What did Serafina say to you?" "She told me I was clever and that she didn't like me, but respected me. Then she told me that loving you would be difficult and that I should be sure before I committed." Willa glanced at him. "She's not wrong." "No, she is not." Xavion's hands tightened on the railing. "I am 800 years old. I am a vampire king. I am powerful and dangerous, and I will outlive you by centuries. Choosing to be with me would mean stepping into a world that will never fully accept you, giving up the quiet life you wanted, and knowing that our time together, no matter how long it feels to you, will be a brief moment in my existence." "That's not exactly a selling point," Willa said, but her voice was gentle. "I know. And yet I am selfish enough to hope you will choose it anyway." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "I have lived 800 years, Willa Oakes, and I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you. I do not know if it is love. I do not know if I remember how to love. But I know that when you are near, the world feels less cold. I know that you make me want to be better, not for political gain or duty, but simply because you deserve someone who is better. And I know that the thought of you walking away makes me understand why some vampires choose the sun." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Xavion, you do not have to answer now. I am asking only that you consider it. Stay with me for a while longer. Let me show you what a life with me could be. And then, if you still wish to leave, I will let you go." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I will hope, every moment until then, that you choose to stay." Willa looked at him, this impossible creature who had upended her entire existence, and felt the weight of the choice settling over her like a cloak. She could leave. She could take the money he would undoubtedly give her, start over in a new city, build the quiet life she had always planned, safe, predictable, hers, or she could stay. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to see what this life actually looks like, not just the crisis and the drama. I need to know if I can exist in your world without losing myself." "That is fair," Xavion said, and the hope in his eyes was almost painful to see. "How much time?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. Long enough to be sure. Then you will have it. I will give you all the time you need." Willa stayed. She was given quarters in the Western Hall, a suite of rooms that was larger than any place she had ever lived, and she tried to build a life within the strange new world she had fallen into. Xavion introduced her to the workings of the vampire court, and she attended council meetings where she slowly learned the intricacies of vampire politics. She met nobles and diplomats and warriors who were centuries old, and most of them treated her with a mix of curiosity and disdain that she learned to ignore. But Xavion never left her to navigate it alone. He was there, always, a steady presence at her side. He did not push for romance or intimacy. He simply spent time with her, showing her his world and listening when she talked about hers. They walked through the hidden gardens beneath the Western Hall, where plants that only bloomed at night filled the air with strange perfumes. He taught her about vampire history, about the wars and alliances that had shaped their society. She told him about her grandmother, about learning to sew by candlelight in a cramped apartment, about the dreams she had nurtured of someday having a shop of her own. Slowly, carefully, they became friends, and then, somewhere along the way, they became more. It happened in small moments. The way his hand would brush against hers when they walked. The way he would watch her work when she mended something for one of the household staff, his expression soft and attentive. The way she found herself looking for him when she entered a room, the way her day felt incomplete if she did not see him. 3 months after the treaty was signed, Willa was sitting in her quarters, working on a piece of embroidery she had started as a way to keep her hands busy, when Xavion knocked on her door. "Come in," she called, and he entered with the quiet grace that still sometimes caught her off guard. "I have something to show you," he said, "if you are willing." She set aside the embroidery. "What is it?" "A surprise. You will have to trust me." Willa smiled. "I do trust you. That's the problem." He crossed to her, held out his hand, and she took it without hesitation. The world lurched, and when it settled, they were standing in a place she did not recognize. It was a building, empty and echoing, with large windows that let in the moonlight. The space was raw, unfinished, but she could see the bones of something beautiful, high ceilings, good light, sturdy walls. "Where are we?" she asked. "A property I own in the city. It has been vacant for years." Xavion watched her carefully. "I thought, if you wished, it could be yours. A shop. Your shop." Willa's breath caught. She walked through the space, her mind already seeing it transformed. Shelves for fabric, a workbench by the window, a small showroom where customers could view her designs. It was perfect. More than perfect. "Xavion, I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it's too much. Because I haven't earned it. Because you think I am offering it as a bribe to make you stay." He moved closer, his voice gentle. "Willa, whether you stay with me or not, you deserve to have the life you dreamed of. This building will be yours, in your name, with no strings attached. If you choose to leave, it is still yours. I am not trying to buy your affection. I am trying to give you what you have worked for." Willa felt tears prick at her eyes. She had spent her whole life fighting for scraps, saving every penny, always afraid that one disaster would wipe out everything she had built. And here was someone offering her the dream she had held close for so long, asking nothing in return. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" "Because I love you." The words were simple, quiet, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. "I have loved you since you knelt on marble and told me the truth about a torn sleeve. I will love you if you stay, and I will love you if you go, and I will love you for the rest of my very long existence. This building is not a bribe. It is a gift, freely given, because you deserve to have the things that make you happy." Willa turned to face him, and the tears spilled over. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." Scared of what? Scared that it was too fast, scared that I was being stupid, scared that I would lose myself in your world and forget who I was. She wiped at her eyes. "But I've spent 3 months watching you, learning who you are when there's no crisis and no drama. And I've realized that you don't want me to be anyone other than who I am. You like that I ask too many questions and that I'm blunt and that I don't know how vampire politics work. You like me exactly as I am, and that's terrifying because it means I can actually trust this." Xavion closed the distance between them in 2 strides, cupped her face in his cool hands, and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though he were afraid she might break. But when she kissed him back, her hands sliding up to tangle in his white hair, the gentleness gave way to something deeper. He kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning, and she poured everything she felt into that kiss, love and trust, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that she was choosing this, choosing him, choosing a life that was anything but safe or predictable. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Xavion rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you will stay?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Willa said. "I'll stay, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I get to keep my own life. I'm not just going to be the king's human girlfriend. I want this shop. I want to work. I want to have something that's mine." "Done. What else?" "I want you to teach me about your world properly, not just the politics, the culture, the history, the things that matter to you. If I'm going to be part of this, I need to understand it." "I will teach you everything." "What else?" "I want you to promise that if I ever feel like I'm losing myself, you'll tell me. That you won't let me become someone I'm not just to fit into your world. You have my word." He pulled back slightly, his garnet eyes intense. "Is there anything else?" Willa hesitated, then said the thing that had been hovering at the back of her mind for weeks. "Eventually, if this works, if we're still together years from now, I want you to turn me." Xavion went very still. "Willa, I know what I'm asking. I've been researching it. I know it's permanent, and I know it's dangerous, and I know I'll lose my humanity. But if I'm going to be with you, I don't want it to be for a human lifetime while you stay frozen. I want forever, or as close to it as I can get. You would give up the sun for me." His voice was barely audible. "I would give up a lot of things for you. But I need to live as a human for a while first. I need to run this shop and have some time to be sure this is what I want, and say goodbye to the life I'm leaving behind." She met his gaze steadily. "But eventually, yes, I want you to turn me." "Then I will." Xavion kissed her again, soft and reverent. "When you are ready. Not before. Thank you." They stood there in the empty building, holding each other, and Willa felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or certainty. She was choosing this strange, impossible life, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not afraid. 5 years later, Willa Oakes stood in her shop, putting the finishing touches on a gown that would be worn by a vampire noble at some grand event she would probably be attending herself. The shop was thriving, known throughout the city for the quality of its work, and she had hired 2 assistants to help manage the commissions that poured in. Outside, the sun was setting, and soon Xavion would arrive to walk her home, as he did every evening. They had settled into a rhythm over the years, a balance between her human life and his vampire one. She ran her shop during the day, and in the evenings she joined him in the Western Hall, attending councils and dinners and the endless social functions that came with being the partner of a vampire king. It was not always easy. There were still nobles who resented her presence, who whispered that she was a passing fancy, that Xavion would tire of her eventually. But there were others who had come to respect her, who saw the way she had helped broker peace with the Eastern courts, and who valued the perspective she brought to the council. And through it all, Xavion was there. Patient, steady, loving her with a constancy that still sometimes took her breath away. The door chimed, and she looked up to see him entering the shop. He had learned to move during the hours just after sunset, when the light was fading but not yet gone, and he wore a coat that covered most of his skin. Even so, she could see the faint discomfort in his posture, the way the lingering daylight made him tense. "You didn't have to come inside," she said, setting down the gown. "I would have met you outside. I wanted to see your work." He crossed to the gown, examined it with the careful attention he gave to everything she created. "It is beautiful. You have a gift, Willa." "I have practice," she corrected, but she was smiling. "Are you ready to go?" "Almost. There is something I wish to discuss first." Willa's heart skipped. Over the years, she had learned to read his moods, and there was something in his voice now that spoke of significance. "What is it? You told me 5 years ago that you wanted to be turned, that you needed time to be sure, but that eventually you would be ready." He held her gaze. "Are you still certain?" Willa had known this conversation would come eventually. She had thought about it often over the years, weighing what she would be giving up against what she would be gaining. The sun, food, the ability to age and eventually die. Those were not small things. But she would also gain eternity with Xavion. She would gain the strength and power to truly belong in his world. She would gain the ability to stop worrying that their time together was slipping away with every passing year. "I'm certain," she said quietly. "I've lived as a human for 28 years. I've built a life I'm proud of, and now I want to build a different life, one that lasts as long as yours does. You understand that there is no going back, that once you are turned, you will be a vampire for the rest of existence?" "I understand." "And you are prepared for the pain of the transformation, for the adjustment period, for the hunger?" "I've been researching it for 5 years. I've talked to vampires who were turned. I know what I'm getting into." Xavion reached out, took her hand, and his cool fingers wrapped around hers. "Then I will turn you, but not today." Willa blinked. "What? Why not?" "Because there are preparations to be made. The transformation is dangerous, and I will not risk you unnecessarily. I want the best healers present. I want the process to happen in a controlled environment where you will be safe." His voice gentled. "And I want you to have time to say goodbye to your human life, truly. To spend a day in the sun, to eat your favorite foods, to do the things you will not be able to do once you are turned." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes. Of course he would think of that. Of course he would want her to have closure. "How long?" she asked. "1 month. Long enough to make arrangements, short enough that you will not have time to doubt." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "And then, if you are still willing, I will make you mine for eternity." The month passed in a blur. Willa spent her days in the shop, finishing commissions and training her assistants to run things while she adjusted to her new existence. She spent time with the few human friends she had made over the years, knowing that those relationships would change once she was no longer human. She walked through the city in the sunlight, memorizing the way it felt on her skin. And she spent her evenings with Xavion, talking about what her life would be like after the turning. He explained the hunger, the way blood would become both sustenance and temptation. He warned her about the heightened senses, the strength that would take time to control. He told her about the centuries stretching ahead, and the strange loneliness of watching the human world change while you stayed frozen. But he also told her about the beauty of it, the way the world looked sharper, more vivid, through vampire eyes, the way time stopped feeling like an enemy and became simply a medium you moved through, the way love, when you had eternity to nurture it, could become something so deep and solid that nothing could shake it. On the final night before the transformation, They stood together on a balcony overlooking the city, and Willa felt a mix of anticipation and fear that made her hands shake. "Are you afraid?" Xavion asked softly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I'm also ready. If you wish to wait longer—" "No! I've had enough time. I want this." She turned to face him. "I want forever with you." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and when they broke apart, he said, "Then let us begin." The transformation was agony. Willa had known it would hurt, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. Xavion's bite was sharp and cold, and then his venom was in her veins, burning through her like acid. She screamed, and he held her through it, whispering words she could not understand through the pain. It felt like dying, like every cell in her body was being torn apart and rebuilt, and the process was taking far too long. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except the pain and Xavion's voice anchoring her to the world. And then finally, it stopped. Willa opened her eyes and gasped. The world was different, sharper. Colors were more vivid, sounds were clearer, and she could hear Xavion's heartbeat, slow and steady, beside her. She looked at her hands and saw that her skin was pale now, white as his, and when she touched her tongue to her teeth, she felt the sharp points of fangs. "Willa," Xavion's voice was cautious, worried. "How do you feel?" She took inventory. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange, humming energy. She felt strong, stronger than she had ever felt in her life. And she was hungry, a hunger that was different from anything she had experienced as a human, deeper and more insistent. "I feel like I could run for miles and not get tired," she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, clearer and more resonant. "And I'm so hungry it hurts." "That is normal. Come, I have blood prepared for you." He helped her to her feet, and she was startled by how easy it was to move, how her body responded instantly to her thoughts. Xavion led her to a room where a glass of blood waited, and she drank it without hesitation. The hunger eased, and she could think clearly again. "How long was I out?" she asked. 2 days. The transformation took longer than expected. Xavion was studying her carefully, as though afraid she might shatter. "How do you feel now?" "Stronger, clearer, different." She looked at him, and for the first time, she could truly see him the way other vampires must, not just beautiful, but radiant, every line of him sharp and perfect. "You're stunning." He smiled, a real smile, and it transformed his face. "As are you." Willa moved to a mirror that hung on the wall and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was familiar, but changed. Her skin was pale, her eyes brighter, her features somehow sharper. She looked like herself, but also like something more, something other. "I'm a vampire," she said, testing the words. "I'm actually a vampire." "You are," Xavion agreed. He moved to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "And you are mine, for eternity." Willa leaned back against him, letting his coolness steady her, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what she had chosen. This was who she wanted to be. "Forever," she whispered, and it was not a question, but a promise. 10 years after that, Willa stood beside Xavion in the council chamber, listening to a debate about trade agreements with the human world, and felt a contentment that still sometimes surprised her. She was a vampire now, fully integrated into the Western court, and she had carved out a place for herself that was uniquely hers. She still ran her shop, though now she worked only at night, and she had become an advocate for stronger ties between vampires and humans, using her unique perspective to bridge the gap between the two worlds. The joint venture with the Eastern courts had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, and Serafina Drakov, now a powerful voice in Eastern politics, occasionally sent Willa messages that were equal parts professional and grudgingly friendly. The war that had once seemed inevitable was now a distant memory, and a new era of cooperation was taking root. And through it all, Xavion was beside her. They had spent 15 years together now, and the love between them had only deepened, tempered by time and challenge into something unshakable. They were partners in every sense, ruling the Western realm together, and the court had come to accept that where Xavion went, Willa would follow, and vice versa. "You are thinking too hard," Xavion murmured during a lull in the debate. "I can see it on your face." "I'm thinking about how different my life is now compared to 15 years ago," Willa admitted. "I was sewing a torn sleeve, that's all. And somehow it led to this." "It led to us," Xavion corrected. He reached for her hand beneath the table, his fingers lacing through hers. "And I would not change a moment of it." "Not even the part where you called off your wedding and almost started a war?" "Especially not that part." Willa laughed, and the sound drew a few curious glances from the other council members. She did not care. Let them look. She had earned her place here, and she was no longer the frightened seamstress who had knelt on marble and tried to make herself invisible. That night, after the council meeting ended and the business of ruling was set aside, Xavion and Willa retreated to their private chambers. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, a time to shed the responsibilities of court and simply be together. "I received a letter from the Eastern courts today," Xavion said as they settled into the chairs by the fire. "Serafina is proposing a joint summit to discuss expanding the trade alliance to include the Northern Territories. That's ambitious." "It is, but if anyone can pull it off, it is Serafina. She has become quite the diplomat." "Who would have thought?" Willa shook her head. "The woman who wanted to destroy me is now one of our strongest allies. People surprise us. You taught me that." Willa looked at him, at the face she had come to know better than her own, and felt a surge of love so strong it was almost painful. "I'm glad I stayed," she said softly. "I'm glad I chose this life." "As am I." Xavion reached for her, and she went to him easily, settling into his lap as he wrapped his arms around her. "You have given me more than I ever thought possible, Willa. You have given me hope and love, and a reason to remember why I wanted to rule in the first place. You have made eternity feel less like a burden and more like a gift. That's what love does," Willa said. "It changes everything. It does." He kissed her, slow and thorough, and she let herself sink into it, into the certainty of him, into the knowledge that this was where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, Xavion rested his forehead against hers. "What would you like to do with our eternity?" he asked. "We have endless time. What dreams do you still wish to chase?" Willa thought about it. There were projects she wanted to pursue, places she wanted to see, changes she wanted to make in the world. But more than any of that, she simply wanted to be with him, to build a life that was full and rich and meaningful. "I want to keep making things better," she said finally. "For vampires and humans both. I want to build on the alliance we started, make it something that lasts. I want to prove that different worlds can coexist, that power doesn't have to come from domination." She smiled. "And I want to do it all with you, beside me. Then that is what we will do." Xavion's voice was a promise. "Together, for as long as existence lasts." Willa kissed him again, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The seamstress who had once knelt on marble to fix a torn sleeve had found something she never expected, a love that transcended worlds, a partnership that would endure for centuries, and a future that stretched ahead, bright and full of possibility. She had chosen forever, and forever had chosen her back, and they lived, loved, and ruled together through centuries that turned to millennia, building a legacy that would outlast empires and reshape the relationship between vampires and humans. They faced challenges and triumphs, wars and peace, and through it all, they remained what they had always been. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and refused to let go. The vampire king and the seamstress, bound by choice, by love, and by the simple, extraordinary truth that sometimes all it takes to change everything is 40 minutes, a torn sleeve, and the courage to be honest.